Buenos días a todas y todos.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first encounter of Creative Synergy, where we will talk about digitalization and new opportunities for creative economy. I'm Vita Agüero. I'm the director of Creative Synergy and co-founder of the platform in Latin America, a space for the development of this important sector in creative economy that we have created along with this platform and Fábrica de Medios, along with the collaboration of our allies in Latin America, Peru, Mexico, Peru, Uruguay, Argentina, Honduras, Colombia, Venezuela, and others, and with the Ministry of Culture and Patrimony and Heritage. I'll give the floor to Carolina Pereira, who's the Secretary Executive of the Ministry of Culture, who will give some words. Thank you, Andrea. It's such a pleasure to be here with you today. Hello to all of those you who have joined us today from different countries. We know we have guests, very important ones from Italy, from Argentina, Ecuador, Colombia, and of course, people from Chile, who I would like to welcome to this cycle of talks. And for us at the Ministry of Culture, Art and Heritage, it's such a pleasure to share with you today. And it's an honor for me to introduce this cycle. And as the name of this event is called, we're talking about a synergy of knowledge and of good practices. Here we have people who are collaborating behind digital synergy, who have worked in the public-private sector, who are every day taking action in the cultural sector, and who are leveraging our cultural products and services. And they are putting everything together. Here we're betting on collaborative work. We're looking for different ways to do things. And we believe that this cycle has been successful so far, and we also believe that the future will be even better. Because here we're collaborating other than competing. And synergy bets on creating a Latin American platform of collaboration where we can all move forward a sector that is one of the most resilient and the most affected sectors in the pandemic. Despite all that, it is a sector that is turning on some lights around synergy and how we can move on to the digital era with the different sectors we collaborate with. And of course, in this cycle, we are trying to train ourselves to know more about the new updates. And today that we're going to talk about digital synergy, and tomorrow as well that we're going to talk about digital economy, and the third day as well, there we're focusing on working in different regions where we can work from north and south, always with a horizon towards the entire region and the entire world. That is why we're focusing our actions on this goal, and we're inviting art workers to do so. That is why, for us as ministry, any initiative towards that goal is more than welcome. And we hope that cycles like this can be more known in other places so that we can all have access to high-quality content. That is what the creative Latin American platform allows for. In Chile, we're really focused on increasing our creative offer in the national capital and in smaller cities as well. We really want to give every territory their own value. And we have great talent that can be leveraged. We believe that there are economies like tourism, like heritage, that can be our allies. From that perspective, the knowledge and the approaches that come from this digital synergy cycle will definitely help us have a more robust ecosystem. It will help us work together, and it will strengthen us as a Latin American region and as leaders in this area. And of course, maybe in the future, it will be the first step towards having more global events. So on behalf of the Creative Economy Secretariat and the Ministry of Culture, Art and Heritage, I really like to welcome you to this cycle of digital synergy. I would like to invite you to enjoy this event, to learn from each other. We have such a big privilege by working in the area of arts and creativity. So this is my invitation to you to continue betting on creative economy, because we believe it's a beautiful way to change the world. So thank you very much, Andrea. Welcome everyone, and may you enjoy this day. Thank you, Carolina, for such nice words and all your support for developing this cycle of digital and creative synergy. So I would like to invite you to get to know some other creatives in the region. I have to confess that it was difficult to edit this amazing interview so that we could fit into the program. All the words that we heard from them were very valuable. Their message about digitalization has been very interesting. So I would like to invite you to, after this, go to the website so you can have access to the full material. So let's go to Max Mojacobo and his guests. Hi, I'm Maximo Jacobi, one of the founders of PLAC, the Creative Latin American platform, and I would like to welcome you to these interviews for the first day on digital synergy. We're very happy for the organization of this event, along with Fábrica de Medios and our different partners with whom we're building bridges of communication and collaboration. We have different guests, and the question for today is, what were the main challenges and opportunities of digitalization, and what are the lights and the shadows within this process in the culture of creativity, understood as an activity, as an economic activity? The idea that digitalization is present, that accelerated during the pandemic and isolation, I believe that more than lights and shadows, there are challenges, capacities, expectations, maybe over-expectations. But that's what we have. We're swimming in an ocean of digitalization. What do we want to do with this fantastic process of creative industries, which are mobilizing, which generate work, which create development, which are going to change the production model of our economies, that are going to transcend boundaries? And I would say that we have to think about what we want to say, what stories we want to tell, and who we want to communicate with. I've been working in the last 6 years and traveling nonstop. From 2019 2020, I was supposed to go only to Tokyo and then continue in the Southeast Asia region and then to Europe. But the pandemic hit. I was at the moment mainly working in murals, painting murals. And I was working with physical materials. I was not used to using digital media. That was not something I was interested in exploring. But nowadays, now everything is digital. And it's also interesting that what is digital can also be transformed to the physical media. The last exhibition that I did was in Miami in digital format. It was a virtual graffiti show in the metaverse with the digital headset, so we could project with Oculus in the gallery, and it was a very interesting experience because artists, we could use these platforms, and now with OpenSea and everything. But of course, I'm pretty new at this.
Para entender un poco los últimos 2 años, casi desde
to understand this, the last 2 years from the sanitary emergency of the pandemic, there's been an accelerated process of digitalization, which is associated with the process of commercialization and the access to purchasing and money, joining through money. This boom of these digital platforms to access content from Java work Metaverse. We generate a virtual space where people can enter in an open and democratic way, maybe with some virtual reality goggles, or maybe with their computer with 2 dimensions. They can enter a 3D space, a virtual 3D space. They can navigate it, they can enter it and see what is there for experiences. Another way to experience is through the NFTs, to see what happens through them. How can we generate tokens associated with the concert, with the performance of an artist, and generate new ways of monetization for most artists? The project we're working on at this moment with the Great Chaco, Argentina, Paraguay, and different organizations in Gran Chaco. We've been working for many years in a project called Nanook Connected Women. And there it is there that there is a new project where we can generate creativity, innovation, and creativity. This project that I'm telling you about is how can we have connectivity that makes sense. How can we digitalize the kind of work that we have been doing for many generations, for thousands of generations? I'm talking about indigenous women. So what is it that we do? We look for a native and indigenous artist to present their work and to tell us their story, to show us that the raw material where she learned her knowledge from. How does she create these new pieces with material taken from the mountains or with different fibers? We are also working with digital artists who are in the market of NFTs. Those are the pieces that are registered in the blockchain. These types of digital artists are working. They are based on a physical piece. In this case, it's a piece of handicraft, and they are giving it special effects. And this kind of co-creation is generated in the territory. It doesn't only create some kind of digital good, it is also creating new economic opportunities for craft women. This is a new option for them to keep training themselves and enter this new model of business. There is a very information that they give us in UNESCO is that every 15 minutes we're losing a native language. This is a very alarming piece of information, and I think here as Latin American countries, we have a challenge, which is to keep our traditions, to protect our indigenous people. And what blockchain is allowing us is to do that. It is to register them, to preserve the culture of the indigenous peoples, and to be able to talk about them in global platforms. Thank you very much for this conversation, and we expect to meet you again in working in new projects.
5, 4, 3, Al aire, André.
Bueno, espero que les haya gustado.
Well, I hope you liked it very much. I would like to thank all the people who interviewed and Maximo Jacobi for this great capsule. And now, I want to invite you to interact with us. We want to invite you to help us to answer this mini survey that we have prepared. For this, please check the QR code that I'm going to send you, or we're going to send you a link to the YouTube chat. In which area of digitalization has had a positive impact in the development of new projects, creative initiatives, and cultural initiatives? Increase of income, increase of audience, increase of positioning, of all of the above. These are the 4 options. You should choose one of the options at the end, where the answer C is the most popular. You should use this QR code through your mobile phone, your camera, and it will lead you, it will send you to this survey. So at the end of the panel, we will be able to check the result of the survey.
Now, a darle el pase a nuestro.
Now I want to welcome the people, the guests of our panel. It will be directed by Sofia Lobos, our partner, funding partner. We're going to check issues related with digitalization and the impacts. We're going to discuss this with important personalities related with this sector. So thank you very much, Sophie. And now please tell us who we have today.
Hola,
hello.
Buenos días, buenas tardes.
Good morning, good afternoon, even good evening, wherever you are at this moment. We're very happy that you are here, taking part in this first meeting of Creative Synergy that has been organized by the Fábrica de Medios and the platform, the Creative Latin America platform. I am Sofia Lobos. It's a great honor for me to moderate, and it's a great challenge to moderate this panel. The main goal is to look into the challenges and the opportunities and even the dilemmas generated by digitalization in the development and the fostering of creative economy. Today I have a panel of experts of very high level. I'm with Natalia Calcaño from Argentina. She is the general subdirector of the section of culture from the Chamber of Deputies from Argentina. She's a sociologist. She was in charge of one of the most important systems in the region, which is the SICA, the National Information System of Culture from Argentina. She has developed different publications associated both with digitalization and the use of information, both in her country and in all the region. I am also. Excuse me, the last name is a little difficult. Lala is from Brazil. She's a pioneer in creative economy, and she's the creator of the methodology of the fluxonomy. She's one of the most important, top four most important futurists from Latin America. She's very associated with performing arts and with the world of culture. She has evolved from her research and the methodology of fluxonomy towards projecting new futures for the development of our countries. Finally, I want to invite Pierluigi Sacco. He is PhD. He's a professor of economic policy from the university. He is the Pescara. He's a member of the OCDE. He's a senior advisor from OCDE, on the Center of Development for the Cities. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Luigi. And he has also developed a very broad, a lot of literature funded, basically not only in issues associated with digitalization, but also in the opportunities that art, culture, and creativity have to generate more social cohesion and local development. So this is a very interesting panel, and we expect it to be a very important space for discussion. This is a context of very great uncertainty, like the one left by the pandemic. And we also have to acknowledge that the creative and artistic sector have certain particular features, very high levels of autonomous workers, but also great relevance in terms of job generation in different countries, according to different studies, recent studies, between 2 and 6% of the total in Latin American average. So if we consider all these features, I would like to start by with Natalia. We will start with we will go in order by countries. We'll go Argentina, Brazil, and then Italy. So Natalia, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us. Well, thank you very much for your invitation, Sofia, and all the team who has organized this very interesting meeting. As Sofia said, this panel is very interesting for me. I'm very interested in hearing my partners in the panel. I want to know what they have to share. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share what we have been developing here in Argentina. As Sofia mentioned before, here we have been working on the issue of the economic characterization of the creative sector. But I'd say that maybe in the last 5 years, and this issue became kind of tricky and a little complicated with the very issue of the accelerated changes with the digital convergence, and now with the pandemic. This is a very important, there are many questions that we have, many uncertainties, and there are many problems that we have to deal with, of course. So it is important to generate these kinds of meetings. From common and collective thought, we can always generate very good ideas. So I celebrate my participation here. My purpose here was to share some ideas, some questions that I've had, rather than conclusions or data. I think we are at a moment where there is a lot of motion. The statistics, the data is something that is a little static. And now we see a sector, a creative sector that is always moving. So it is very difficult to stop it for a moment and take a picture. So I think it is very good idea to share some access related with what Sofia invited me to this panel to tell me about the generation of data that has the Cinca, the system from Argentina, and all other systems from Latin America. How does digitalization, my purpose is to think about convergence in terms of about culture in terms of convergence. I don't want to take a long time because the important thing here is the interchange. I will refer to the cultural sector because it includes it is a matter of human rights. It has a power as a concept that we have to preserve and take care of. So I'm going to relate to that cultural sector and this idea that from this convergence there is a proliferation of data where our interaction and they become data, and how this could invite so that they are better used when we design creative strategies.
At the moment of carrying out exhibitions, how cultural activity can go along with proliferation of data. And I believe that can be the case, but we have to be aware of a few aspects. First of all, as we talk about data mining, it is an interesting concept because it looks like a mountain where we have to start digging and select which ones are stones, which one is coal, and what kind of metal it is, and where the copper is, etc. So we have to do some sort of mining to find the information that we want among all those metals. And by this I mean that from this amazing amount of data available in the digital space, we need to use tools to make good use of that information depending on our objectives, because otherwise it's just too much data that can end up being confusing. And of course, not everyone has access to that, but that's not something we can discuss right now. But I believe that methodological tools are necessary. We need to define our universe, what are our perspectives. If we have questions, hypotheses about those data, maybe that data is going to be useless. So they need to answer to an hypothesis or question we raise. Also, I believe that it's important to work with a methodology design. It's not true that AI processes data by itself. We need to use statistical data. We need to use certain methodologies to find some, information that is available to us. And we are also, we should be able to analyze that data. And that's not something that happens on its own. So we need to develop strategies for that. So just figures don't tell us much. They have to come with training in analysis of that data, of those figures. So I believe that there is an opportunity to use data for developing our sector. But I believe there's a long way to go. We need analysis, design, concept, and methodologies so that we can really achieve our goals and that they become actual tools to improve our performance. On the other hand, as another aspect that I consider is important mentioning, that Sofia mentioned before, the impact of the pandemic in the cultural and creative sector, and how this impact means some opportunities, some challenges. what we have seen so far is that this digital convergence or cross-cutting tendency where we have editorial, music, audiovisual, all come together in this digital era with other data. All this convergence that has been happening in the last 10 years in Argentina and other areas of Latin America is becoming more accelerated since the use of smartphones. And in Argentina in particular, we saw that happening very quickly since 2014, where we saw there were smartphones that could process a lot of data that were cheap enough, so we started using them more and more. This led to the acceleration of access to cultural content through smartphones. And that, as a consequence, changed the landscape of cultural economy. And after that, the pandemic accelerated things even more. There was a process that was already happening, but this made it quicker. And what we call the analogical blackout happened during the pandemic because most of us turned off all our access to cultural content through physical means. We only had that digital means left for accessing cultural content. So this has deep consequences. And that is why I was saying that it's important to analyze this together. And I would say that from my perspective, this sees a breaking down of the previously existing value chains. For example, in the publishing industry, we have different, links and chains. For example, design, translation, distribution, retailing, etc. Those were different links that during the pandemic broke down, and everything came together in the digital era. And that is why we don't talk about those chains in the sector anymore, and we start talking about the ecosystem concept in the creative industry. And it brings as well other languages, other sectors, and new ways of creation, of knowledge and distribution, access to content. So we moved away from tangible objects like a movie, like a book, and we moved towards contents in the same space, in the cloud, and that are more intangible. In production and economic aspects, this has a deep effect because now everything lives together in this intangible area. So we have loads more space compared, for example, to a library. And we have this ecosystem with loads of species in different areas of communication, for example, from small producers or, for example, a small blogger who creates things in a more artisanal way. And along with this producer, we have a big media company in that same ecosystem. So we have stakeholders of different sizes and levels. And we can't say that a small producer will at some point become a big media. It's not about that. It's a convergence, a co-living of different species. So we have to set good rules so that we can go all live together. Something that also changed deeply was the monetization models, how we profit nowadays compared to how it was before in the creative sector, in the traditional sector, where now what used to be the sale of units, and when you sell them more, you have more income. We used to have, for that, we used to have advertising and sale of units, of books, of CDs, and then they become bestsellers, and then you become, have the award of platinum award, etc. But now everything becomes digital, and there is still advertising, but we count more on subscriptions and the trade of data. And this gives everything a different logic. So these links where the profit used to happen don't exist anymore. And all this is related to the cultural and creative industries in the sense that we need to have regulation for the distribution of those of that profit. But all that breaks down, and it's a new game that has no rules yet. And we are playing a new game with old rules, and that's why we're having so many challenges, especially in terms of the circulation of that profit that comes from culture. I think I'm running out of time. I just wanted to mention that it is important to rethink this as a new opportunity, to think about the new rules we want to play with. What are going to be the regulations by the governments, by states? There are suggestions of generating new taxes, for example, those suggested by Denmark. So we have different regulatory systems that we could discuss. For example, for non-regulation, where, for example, it's corporations who generate their own regulations, or we can have regulations imposed, so to speak, by government. So how do we think about this intelligent regulation to be able to use these tools, that data, that this convergence offers, to have a healthy coexistence of creative life in this new era? Great. Thank you so much, Natalia. You opened the dialogue with these three interesting pillars, which I believe are very relevant. For example, you mentioned the capacities of the sector in terms of management and use of information. And here we have the role of interdisciplinary characteristics, how we can incorporate different disciplines to use this data. Because as you said, a figure is nothing, we cannot analyze it. Also, as you said, the analogical blackout, how it led to new ways of monetizing. And finally, the financing structures that are related to the other cycles we're going to have tomorrow and after tomorrow, where we're going to talk about investments for impact and production chains. So it's a good idea to rethink how we can think of refinancing this, because it's always been a complex concept. So, acknowledging all this, we would like to give the floor to Lala so she can continue reflecting on these topics. We have been discussing interesting aspects so far, and I will give the floor to Lala then. Thank you, Sophia. It's such a pleasure to be with you today. I'm always happy to hear about creative economy, because I've had the privilege to be a pioneer in this area when it started to be discussed in the UN as a development strategy. And then we started working with different countries, because this was something completely new. I worked with the UN and Spanish cooperation until 2013, and then I stopped in order to systematize this work that I'm sharing with you. And in this period, I've had the privilege to be in Chile with the Ministry of Economy, who started working on this topic. So I decided to today talk about the macro level, because I'm more than anything, I'm a futurist since 2005, and I ended up going to other economic dynamics like multi-currencies, and I will talk about that later, because I believe that there is a bigger context, which is the role of futurists, where digitalization is key, but also undoubtedly with the resources available, but also with a new structure and a new perspective, we can work with the main challenges of these moments. So I'd like to share screen.
I want to show you this macro vision of what is going on. It is a systemic challenge, not only for the cultural sector. So let's see.
Okay. No. Okay.
Okay.
Ahí vamos.
Here we go.
Pues, si después quieren más información un poco sobre esta mirada,
if you would like some more information about this approach that I'm going to show you, you could, in that link tree, you can find a lot of content, another way to know about it. The first thing that I want to share and that I think is important to know about it, and is in the background of everything that is going on with us now, is that we are living. Everything is life. And life only wants one thing, and it is evolution. Evolution means organizing in more complex forms, and complexity implies a higher capability of collaboration. This happens in biology, and it also happens in societies. And now we are here. We need to know how to work as organisms in a global scale. Before I used to need to explain this a lot, but now COVID explained everything. Now the thing is that we are all, as both as individuals and as organizations, we are accustomed to thinking as cells individually, and this is a big problem. It's the biggest problem that companies have, especially small companies. They have a lot of problems with this. The system of support to small companies here has shown that they won't achieve. In the 21st century, it's not possible to work by yourself. This is the hypothesis. And for this, we need digitalization, because what's going on? This transition, that is the greatest one that we have experienced in the history of humanity, which is why we're going through what we're going through. This is a huge transition. If on the one hand we consider time and connectivity, and on the other hand we consider scale and impact, it took us hundreds of thousands of years as a collector, gatherers, then thousands of years in agriculture, then many centuries regarding around trade and commerce. It took us to the industry, and a few decades ago, we are in the digital world. This is a great change. And it is very fast, because before change could not be experienced in one life, and one decision didn't have a big impact in a person's life. It would take more than 1 century to show its effects. And now the decisions that we make now, especially these models of organization, will have an impact, and an immediate impact, because the scale impact passes in very short time with a lot of connectivity. So the challenge that we have now is that we are in an unsustainable situation as the network, because it is immaterial. It doesn't have time and space as us here. The network has an exponential rhythm, but we, the planet and the time, we are not exponential. We are material. So our capabilities are linear, and that is the crisis. I mean, behind all the crises, we have this one. The digital world, which is exponential, and we have a linear capability of response. But we need to have a response, and the response is convergence. We are very far from this ability to converge, but converging is the only possibility to become exponential. For this, we need technology. We already have it. This is perfect. And we can see that with the 2008 crisis, new technological giants appeared, which are able to converge data, such as Facebook and Google, and they can also infrastructure and market surplus, such as Amazon and Mercado Libre. And now with this new crisis from 2020, which is bigger than the one from 2008, it will bring with it the giants of collaboration. What does that mean? This is the other part that we are missing: collaboration. For example, before we were talking about data. Imagine if we collaborate with our data in a more widespread way, not as centralized as it is done now, but as a widespread way. Imagine if we manage to converge skills, all the surplus that we have, all the possibilities of alliances, this possibility, this word that we have in Portuguese that I don't know in Spanish, which is parceiro, which is like a friend. It's different from a partner. And so what's going on? All the people that we have in the creative economy, they are part of, they belong to a world that I call Project Land. Project Land has to get resources in order to do a project. They use such resources, but then the resource is over. And they live in a permanent restarting. They get resources, they do the project, then they get again, they do it again. But then we have a new way, business land. They use new resources to generate new businesses. This is the first thing, I think, that projects that are dedicated to creative economy, the first thing is to change this pattern of collecting resources in order to do a project, and not to create a new structure that can generate new businesses. Because if there are new businesses, it is also possible to think about another thing that business land is doing, which is the design of products and services to generate recurring businesses. This is the main wonder that can be offered by the digital possibilities. Another great thing, another great possibility that is offered to us by the digital world. Each company has a budget. The budget for intelligence, the budget for infrastructure, the budget for platforms, distribution channels, and a budget for management. This can be very different if we manage to converge, if we manage to collaborate, because, for instance, if we share such budgets, intelligence, infrastructure channels, they are all shared management. Very little resources are enough, and the remaining resources can be invested in common projects. For example, that is the base of my work. This is what we are based on. And if there are such resources, new businesses can be generated, and we can generate a growing spiral. And this growing spiral will manage to get new transactions that, given their new networks, they can generate a new recipe, and the result of this recipe is to generate new funding. And this opposite to a vicious circle. Opposite to that, a cycle of abundance can be generated, but this is how we are in terms of our capability to converge. This is the problem. So converging how? Well, we work in 4 different dimensions. The first one is the method, the method that Sofia discussed, and is the method that we are working on in Chile with the Ministry of Economy. It's a very beautiful project. We are in the second stage, and it is in the program of nodes of exportation. This is a node of living arts. So what do we see? In order to sustain collaboration, and we need to work on 4 different dimensions. These dimensions are also connected with 4 different kinds of economy. So I will tell you a little bit about this and how this can take place. First, in order to achieve the survival, creative economy now, not only the creative economy, but especially those working in art and culture, they need to employ the resources besides money. We need to employ them in the 4D, what we call 4 dimensions. The first one is the cultural, in terms of knowledge, resources, experience, the environmental. The second one is the environmental, which is also associated with what is related with nature, but also with technology and everything that is digital. In social terms, we need to think of what is associated with structures and management of the collective, all the forms to organize. For example, here, future is basically in terms of the cultural sector, the future is associated with creating platform co-ops, this new kind of convergence. And those who already operate like this have advantages at this moment. Besides resources in the 4 dimensions, when you work by converging and using digital resources in order to achieve this exponentiality and circulating the resources, not only the financial ones, we can achieve results in 4D. What is the meaning of this? That means that the job of each person has more value, and this is very important in creative economy, and results are generated and 4D value when we have the possibility to generate more in each one of these dimensions. Nowadays, this is even more possible because we have ways, due to things of blockchain, and tokenization, Web 3.0, monetization of data, all of these possibilities. We have a new app for this every day. So these digital possibilities allow all of these things. We can have the circulation of resources and results. Now I'm about to finish, Sofia. So when we are working with these 4 kinds of economy, thanks to the digital world, we manage to become exponential in the cultural world. And we achieve this thanks to the non-material character of this world. This can be multiplied in the environmental world, which is the shared economy. We go from the logic of owning to the logic of using, which is allowed by the digital world. In the social world, which is collaborative economy, we go from centralized to widespread. This is also common thanks to digital, like, for example, DAOs. And finally, in the financial world, because it's more and more possible every day to operate with resources that are besides the financial ones. This is what I wanted to share with you as opportunities in the digital world. From this convergence of our work, and we can know it if you enter with my name. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Lala. La verdad es que nos abordaste.
Thank you very much, Lala. Thank you for that, those words. You gave us a different perspective. And you have talked about how structures have become more complex. And you've talked about the importance of collaboration to generate new forms of economy through the dimensional, cultural, environmental, and financial pillars. I also think it's interesting. There seems to be a microphone on. So it's important to talk about the long term and how that can be helpful for sustainability. So let's give the floor to Pierluigi, who's going to have the last intervention, and then we will have an open dialogue among the speakers. Thank you very much, Sofia. And I'm sorry if I don't have my speech in Spanish, but I'll speak in English.
And I'm really grateful to be part of this wonderful conversation about the future perspectives and scenarios of digital and cultural production. I think that we have at the moment a very limited understanding of how digital ecosystems really work. And not because we are stupid, but because we will really need much more time to understand how the digital transforms culture and creative processes, and in particular, processes of cultural participation. The reason is that we have basically the same attitude towards the digital today that at the beginning of the 20th century, we had towards new media like cinema. At the beginning of the century, when cinema was invented, basically we had no real model of how cinema works. So what we did was basically to adapt the lessons from another medium that somehow resembled the functioning of cinema. And at that point, that was theater. So theater, at the beginning of cinema, provided the model from this point of view. And for example, if you watch today silent movies, you understand that, for example, gestures, makeup, expressions were all basically mediated, basically borrowed by theater, because that was the closest model that we had. So today we are tackling the new challenges of the digital, considering basically the traditional mainstream media of the 20th century as the model still. And I make an example in this regard. Of course, we see major differences between traditional media and, for example, social media. We have, of course, people on digital platforms. They, of course, produce their own content. They engage in discussions with other people. And from this point of view, this is clearly very different from what can happen, for example, in TV, in traditional TV, or in cinema. But the point is that these traditional media are broadcasting media, in which you have somebody who produces content that broadcasts content to users, to the public. However, if you think of how we use today social media, for example, my Instagram feed, or my Twitter feed, or my Facebook, or my TikTok, what am I doing? I'm basically broadcasting myself. I am basically transforming my own little channel in a what we could call an ego channel that is my personal reduced version of big mainstream media. Of course, I can interact with others. Of course, I can engage in conversations that were not possible on mainstream media. But again, it's all about, let's say, profiling myself as a source of content. So from this point of view, there is a basic analogy between traditional mainstream media and the way in which we use, for example, digital media that is often overlooked. And this is a problem because this is, by the way, one of the reasons why we have difficulty with this new media. For example, we are facing an increasing amount of conflict, controversy, hate speech, for example, on social media. And the reason is that the ways in which people behave on a physical interaction stage is very different from the way in which people behave in a digital interaction stage. For example, in physical interaction, if somebody behaves badly, other people can, stare at them with disapproval. They can say, what are you doing? And of course, this kind of attitude is intimidating for many people. But in the digital stage, there's nothing like that. So people don't have signals. They don't have cues that certain types of behaviors are antisocial. So as a consequence of this, this idea of ego broadcasting is, of course, generating lots of new traffic, lots of new content, but at the same time is basically tweaking the potential of digital media to replicate a logic that comes from the 20th century. And not incidentally, the digital itself is basically a technical way to facilitate a social change that happened long before the invention of digital media. That was basically the explosion of subcultures at the end of the Second World War. This is where all digital culture really comes from. Why I'm saying this? Because of course we start to have some clues of what could be a really different way to use digital media. And this is important exactly for the topic of the panel of today, which is the new creative economy. The real potential of digital media and the more generally digital production of content has to do with co-creation. This is something that is authentically different from what happened in the 20th century. So broadcasting is not so different. Digital broadcasting can be more powerful and more interactive than traditional analog broadcasting, but the substance is not very different. But co-creation is really different. The fact that we don't have any longer just individual authors, but we have communities of people who engage together in the cooperative production of content. This is the future. So the idea of individual authorship, which is so important for us, it's a pillar of our culture, is not going to be disrupted completely, clearly, but it's going to be dramatically expanded once the full potential of digital ecosystems is deployed. So as a consequence of this, we understand what is the basic limitation today to the development of the digital economy. Because we could say, well, what limitation? I mean, it's a huge, the biggest companies in the world are all related to digital content, one way or another. Yes, this is true. But at the same time, this kind of content, once again, has to do with companies whose model is very old in terms of the underlying business model. Think of a giant like Facebook. Facebook is an economic giant, but what is basically the main source of revenue of a giant like Facebook? It's advertising. Advertising is 20th century. It's something that has to do with very traditional ways of creating value. And one way or another, Google is the same. So one way or another, clearly, I mean, we have differences with Amazon, for example, or with Apple. But one way or another, again, we see that for these huge companies, the intrinsic business model is what we could call a radical extractive model, in which they are basically trying to extract the maximum possible value for every single interaction. And this is, again, a very old model. So what we are experimenting today are also new possibilities to generate economic and social value through different channels that not only have to do with the big corporations. But this requires a completely different approach to cultural participation. We are starting to understand what are the limits from this method. With my research group, for example, we have an EU-funded, a big project funded by the European Union in this moment, that has to do with understanding the role of digital media in fostering participation. And we have analyzed some of the most famous digital platforms from the point of view of patterns of participation. For example, we have analyzed Wikipedia, and we have analyzed TikTok. One could say, oh, well, they are very different. Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, basically, so it's very highbrow. It's very much about knowledgeable people creating lemmas for an encyclopedia. Whereas TikTok, well, I mean, everybody, a teenager, is just filming themselves and broadcasting on the net. So you would expect that, for example, participation from users in TikTok is much more generalized, is much wider than participation in Wikipedia. Is this true? No. They're basically the same. Only a small minority of people actually produces most of the content. Most people are lurkers. They just look at what others are doing. So, for example, from the point of view of enabling, empowering participation from people, we still have an economy in which a small minority of people produces the content and most people absorbs this content. This is clearly at odds with the full potential of digital ecosystems. So the real problem that we have today, if we really want to start to create the new conditions for social economic value creation through channels that are not just adaptation from 20th century models like the ones that we mostly experience today, is of course creating conditions for much wider and more profound participation from people. And this has to do very much with rethinking cultural institutions. Think, for example, of museums. Museums in the traditional sense are temples of knowledge. They are places where you go to learn from the experts what is art history, what is the history of science, what is archaeology, and so on and so forth. So it's a very top-down model in which you learn from the experts and you are public, and your only possibility, your only agency is passively learning from somebody else. But in this new kind of society, people are increasingly asking for more agency. They want to participate because, of course, we have not learned yet how to co-create, but we want to do it. We feel an urgency to speak our mind. In many cases, we are drawn back by our inability to do so. But this does not mean that people would not like to do it. They would like to do it, but they don't know how to do it. So from this point of view, for example, museums today are transforming themselves into what we could call increasingly social hubs of knowledge, in which the idea is not simply to go to the temple and being instructed, elevated by the experts, but to generate content, unleashing your imaginary, your creative potential with a close interaction with facilitators and experts. And this is really becoming one of the most interesting and innovative forms of content production today. But clearly, we have a scenario from this point of view, and I'm gonna conclude in 1 minute. We have a scenario from this point of view. On one side, of course, there is a stronger and stronger capacity from the big digital platforms to double down on their extractive model to make the digital economy even more concentrated and even more extractive. On the other hand, there is a possibility of a truly bottom-up and distributed new models, new culture and creative ecosystems, but they really need a new form of empowerment, of digital citizenship, of inclusion that brings everybody in the position of participating to this kind of processes. This is a big challenge that we face for the next 2 decades, basically. And the direction that we will take will make an enormous difference, not only for our digital economies, but probably also for our democracies. Thank you very much for your attention.
Wow, Pierre. Abriste un enorme portal.
Well, you opened a huge gate by doing this transition, going from these models, the 20th century models, where, of course, there are certain formulas that have been pre-established and what has been generated by digitalization, and how to achieve, how to create new models of co-creation that allow, through collaboration, greater participation of communities, which is somehow part of what I guess it's also happening there. But in Chile, particularly, which is my context, there is a crisis of trust, which is very deep, and how to generate these forms of greater participation are a very relevant topic. Now I would like to invite our 3 panelists. As I think there are some points of convergence that we could talk about, but also, of course, I want to give you freedom to interchange ideas. On the first hand, there is the issue of competences for the use of information that Luigi mentioned, how to generate models of distribution that can generate greater participation, but that implies capabilities, which is what Natalia mentioned, and interdisciplinarity, and also the financial models that were also mentioned by Natalia imply like generating new capabilities, and Lala also placed value in it when we discussed these things were new methodologies in which we can connect and generate permanent income through thinking in these 4 dimensions: the society, cultural, financial, and environmental. So my first question there is an issue that maybe we didn't mention, but I think it's very important, and I think maybe you could reflect about it. It has to do with connectivity, because we talked about this a lot when we were preparing this panel with the team, and it is how to generate. I mean, digitalization also depends on the degree of connectivity and on the conditions of access to mobile devices and the possibilities that use of those platforms offers. And if public policies generate and foster these kinds of forms without thinking about the attention and without considering that part of the public who don't have access, and they can generate conditions of inequality that are basically structural. So I would like to depart basically from the issue of connectivity. And that I would like to you to share some ideas that you may have about this. Well, I have a very interesting experience to share. When the pandemic started, that was in March. The equivalent to Colfo in Brazil was SIBRAE, the Brazilian Service of Support to Pymes, to small companies. And we had a fair of collaborative services in March. The manager, she's very creative. This is in Alagoas, in the northeastern Brazil. This is a very poor area. There isn't much infrastructure for connection, but she said, we have to do this fair digitally. In 1 month, she managed to do it. And we worked with craftsmen, craftwomen from the inner Paraíba, which is very rural and it's a very small population. It was an incredible experience of adaptation because people have a mobile phone. In Brazil, WhatsApp is used a lot for communication. So there are ways. So we adapted everything to what we had, and it was really impressive because I have been saying for many years we can work on digital things, and they kept saying, no, our audience is not prepared, they don't have the conditions, and from that the result was really impressive. It was 80-year-old ladies, they were beginning to sell their handicrafts in their mobile phone. So of course there is a limitation, of course, and it should be a priority for every government. But when there isn't any connectivity, adaptability is also useful. I mean, it is possible to do things if you have the intention.
Natalia. Genial, Natalia, si nos puedes profundizar.
Natalia, if you could go deeper into this, because at the end of your lecture, you mentioned the new rules of the game that could be generated around the financial issues. Could you go a little bit deeper into those ideas? Because I think that is also important if you associate it with what Pierluigi was saying, these new forms of inclusiveness, how to generate the challenge of going to a model that allows more participation, that is less extractivist. And this is somehow connected with what Lala is mentioning, this access to generating competences.
Bueno, voy yo igual más o menos, sí, totalmente, sí, porque iba pensando, que iba reflexionando sobre...
I will begin because I was anyway thinking about what Sofia was saying as she was saying it. I have a coincidence with what she was saying in terms of what Pierluigi mentioned regarding the extractivist models and the need to rethink about them. Now I can talk about regulation a little bit, which is crucial nowadays, and it's very associated with what you mentioned before as panelists and speakers today. There is an issue that is central today. We're referring to a kind of activity that, in terms of digital convergence, allows the access to many contents, such as the cloud, but it is also a great business. It's an activity, an economic activity that generates jobs, it generates exports, imports, technology, it has different connected services. I mean, we're thinking about an economic sector that moves with an economic logic. So I was thinking about what Pierluigi was proposing at the end, which is associated with collaborative issues. So how to think about the possibilities in terms of this crisis, technological, this convergence and these new forms, and in the generation of new contents, we have to leave the individual context and start thinking about the permanent collective co-creation. If you think about how to organize, how to place value and how to generate economic value, well, this is done through copyright, which is the foundation of economic generation. Is absolutely individual. What copyright is doing is to make it difficult for the circulation of these contents. It is always thinking of as individuals who own their creation, and from that they generate revenues and money. But how to think about this logic from the foundation of the concept, from the origin of knowledge, because if we want this to keep on being in this capitalism that we're experiencing today, the knowledge capitalism, which is experiencing a very evident crisis. We can see that not only associated with the pandemic, but in ways to accommodate to this new form of capitalism that has to still be sustainable. We need to think about the rules, the regulation, the laws, and the forms in which states are organizing the valorization of the contents. If we're thinking that we are the owners of the creation, but how to foster co-creation? Is it going to be extractivist? And are there three transnational companies that are going to be in charge of this? Is this going to implode the possibilities, the international possibilities of generation of content? So I think it is this discussion is very serious, and we need to generate prospectively proposals regarding certain regulation that is not connected with the current realities, and we can see that reflected in the economic problems around the world that are becoming stronger, and not only in terms of the economic problems, but the hyper concentration. We have big companies that are monopolizing the contents. Very few people are generating new ideas and variations in the possibilities. And these terms of concentration, equity, and regulation are central issues that we need to consider in future years. I absolutely agree with you, Natalia. Incredible. Pierluigi, I'm also thinking about the issue of intellectual property and the models of funding. Which do you think are new ways that the artistic and cultural and creative initiatives could consider something associated with mediation? But it is difficult for me to imagine how to place value. I mean, Natalia mentioned this very clearly. Very frequently, the capital derives from intellectual property, or as Lala mentioned, from the project, from writing a project and executing it and then finishing it. Which are some other ways that you think could give continuity to this initiative, to place value so that more participation and social cohesion can be fostered.
Sofia, and I totally agree with Natalia about the crucial aspect of the role of copyright and intellectual property more generally. In some sense, the role of copyright with respect to the traditional cultural industries model is exactly the role of the hybrid or broad distinction with respect to the traditional patronage model that was pre-industry. So they are the models in which you establish the power relationship. If you accept that power relationship, nothing can really change. But of course, then the point is, how can we go beyond this? Well, one of the most interesting aspects of co-creation is that you create economic value and social value through very different channels. I just make an example. We know today, for example, that cultural participation, and especially when this is social, when people interact, improves dramatically the psychological well-being of people, and in many cases, even health. And it's interesting, especially in this post-pandemic scenario, in which, for example, the coping dimension of cultural participation has been so crucial, for example, under lockdowns, for many people who were socially isolated to preserve their own mental sanity. So imagine, for example, active aging, elderly people. For elderly people, participation makes an enormous difference in terms of maintaining their autonomy and staying healthier, taking less medicines and seeing less doctors. Today, the functioning of the health and medical system is one of the biggest liabilities of our society. We spend an enormous amount of money to cure people who fall ill, and clearly, the more you age, the more you are prone to more and more treatment. But if you are able to engage people in ways that improve their health and well-being, you are saving an enormous amount of money. So this means that you can use part of this money that you are saving from this kind of cultural participation to finance cultural activities themselves. And it's a win-win, because people are better, you do things saving resources, and at the same time, in some sense, dramatically improving exactly what is the purpose of the health system itself, making people healthier, making people more active in society. Or think, for example, of what happens in environmental sustainability. If people, for example, co-create new models in which, through cultural participation, for example, you devise better circular economies, better ways to recycle, better ways to reuse things, what is the impact of this economically? It can be huge. Again, if you can find ways to redistribute this value, you can create a situation in which participation generates value, not necessarily by extracting, but on the contrary, by converting social value into an economic value that improves the well-being of the society. So it's a completely different way of thinking, but that's exactly a way of thinking that taps into the opportunities of the digital rather than tweaking the digital to the logic of the pre-digital and the traditional 20th century industry.
Genial, Pierluigi, es que no podríamos haber terminado mejor este panel.
Couldn't have finished this panel with better words, because what you said connects with the next talks we'll have. Tomorrow we'll talk about experiences in well-being and health. So all this sets the path to the future conversations tomorrow. So it's great that we're opening the dialogue for continuous conversation. We're going to wrap up here, but thank you so much. Thank you for participating in such a conversation, and that's our goal as an institution, to give continuity to this dialogue, to open the space to discuss aspects in a sector that is not very well supported. Sometimes we don't have the capacities to have enough agency. But this kind of discussion can help us generate content that help us move forward and have new ways of creating, building development. So thank you so much. Thank you for everything. It's been such a pleasure to join you today.
Okay. Muchas gracias, Sofía.
Thank you, Sofía. Thank you, Natalia, Lala, Pierluigi. It was such an interesting conversation. I just wanted to take the opportunity to mention a few things about what has been discussed about the impact of digitalization to improve access to culture, to democratize art and culture, to create co-creation spaces for arts and culture. For example, with visual artists, connectivity, monetization through new technologies like NFT and blockchain, also to have access to global audiences, integration of far communities, innovation, new tools and business models for creativity, sustainability. We have seen with the pandemic how, despite adversity, human beings, we move forward and how we have made the most of technology. Of course, there's a long way to go. There are still communities that are excluded, but these are challenges that we will continue exploring so that in the future we have better connectivity and that connectivity becomes a basic right for everyone. In the cycle of creative economy, we're boosting the connection of the sector with other sectors, so there's more collaboration. And to finish, I would like to share the results of the survey that we did during this event. So for that, I'm going to share a screen. And we're going to look at the results. I hope you can see it. So the question was, in what area of digitalization has there been a positive impact for development of entrepreneurships and creative and cultural industries? As you can see, the answer with highest percentage was increase in audiences. This goes in line with what we have discussed. Digitalization has allowed us to increase our audiences in the creative sector, and we're reaching more people and more communities. So to wrap up, thank you so much to all those of you who've joined us. For us, it's been a great effort, but it's really worth it. As Sofia was saying, we have 2 more days of discussions. We're going to talk about financing and impact tomorrow, and Friday we're going to talk about production chain and the importance of that topic. Thank you so much also to Fábrica de Medios, who made the production and broadcasting of this event possible. Thank you so much, and see you soon.